Introduction to Supply Chain Management. The purpose of this video is to give you a broad overview of what supply chain management is so that you can keep your eye on the forest as you go through this course and learn details about various subtopics. I'll also talk about how supply chain management differs from operations management, which you may have already studied. So before we can talk about supply chain management, we have to ask ourselves, what is a supply chain? A supply chain consists of all stages involved in fulfilling a customer's request. Customer is an integral part of the supply chain. When I use the word customer here, I'm talking about the end consumer that you can see in the diagram to your right. We sometimes use the word consumer or end consumer to refer to this customer, because if you think about this illustrated supply chain, the retailer is a customer of the distributor is a customer of the manufacturer. However, often when we talk about B2B relationships, like a buyer company and a supplier company, like distributor buying from a manufacturer, we'll often use the terms buyer and supplier instead of using the term customer so as not to confuse the two. Okay? However, when you do hear end consumer or final customer, those terms means the person who buys the product to use it, not a company which buys the product to build something else with it. Typical supply chain stages may include raw material supplier. The raw materials may be bought by component manufacturers which make components. That may be bought by a manufacturer which assembles or combines or makes the final product. Then between the manufacturer and the retailer, there may or may not be wholesalers and distributors. Sometimes these could be third-party logistics companies which don't own the product but just help the manufacturer to transport it to the retailer. And then there might be a retailer. Sometimes the manufacturer may sell directly to the customer as well, and the end customer. Okay? So it's not that all of these stages are always present, but this is what a typical supply chain might look like. Some people prefer the term supply networks or supply chain network to a supply chain because they make the point that you have multiple suppliers, multiple manufacturing facilities, even if it's one company. So, Intel, for example, may have more than one manufacturing foundry when it used to have manufacturing foundries, right? Dell may have more than one production facility, for example. So you could have multiple manufacturing sites. Then you could have multiple distribution centers. If you think about Amazon's supply chain, Amazon has many distribution centers in the United States to be able to provide fast Amazon Prime delivery. And then you'll have multiple retail locations. So in all, it's not a chain. You have, product flowing from multiple companies to multiple companies from one stage to the next. And so it looks a little bit like an uprooted tree with lots of branches and and roots going all over the place, or kind of looks like a web or a network. Now, supply chain, the arrows here, the arrows in black that you've been seeing in these diagrams, which connect two stages of a supply chain, represent product flow. But there are other flows in the supply chain as well. So material or product flows from suppliers towards end customers. Same for value-added services. The distributor may provide a service to the retailer. For example, the retailer may provide a service to the customer, such as return service, warranty service, things like that. So you have services and products flowing from suppliers towards end consumers. Then you have money flowing the other way. The ultimate source of money for the supply chain is revenue generated from end consumers. That revenue is revenue for the retailer. The retailer is going to pay the distributor only if it has any revenue. If the retailer makes no money at all, it cannot pay its suppliers. So the suppliers get paid from the retailer's revenue, and that is their revenue. And those companies which sell to the retailer, from their own revenue, they'll pay their supplier, which is the manufacturer. That will be revenue for the manufacturer. The manufacturer in turn will pay from its revenues to its suppliers. So the revenue of each stage is what is paid to it by the next stage. So the revenue of the manufacturer comes from what the distributor pays it and so forth. So that's why we can think of money as flowing upstream. Sometimes flowing towards the supplier is called upstream, and flowing towards the end consumer is called downstream. Why? If you think about a river or a stream, water flows from a high area to a low area. Upstream is the high area, maybe a mountain, and the river or stream flows down, and downstream you have like the valley, right? And so the flow of the water is always from upstream to downstream, and so we use that term because we compare the water to material or product, because the product flows from suppliers to the end customer. We call the supplier as upstream and the customer, the end customer, as being downstream. So if you're talking about a manufacturer, we talk about the upstream supply chain, we're talking about the suppliers of that manufacturer. And if we are talking about a manufacturer and we talk about the downstream supply chain, we're talking about the distributor, the retailer, and so on. Information flows both ways. The manufacturer will get information about retail sales. Retailer will get information about manufacturing lead times, manufacturer's inventory. And so to make decisions in the supply chain, you need upstream and downstream information. And then there's a return flow of materials as well, which is recycling or returns. So when a consumer is done with a product, they recycle it or give it to a company which will either recycle it for components or metals or other parts, or reuse it, or refurbish it and sell it in a secondary market. Or it may go to a trash fill, or it may be a product that the customer has returned, so it goes all the way back to the manufacturer, right? So this is called reverse flow, where material flows from the end consumer back upstream in a supply chain. This is becoming more and more important as more and more companies invest in recycling, reuse type of operations, because as certain materials become scarcer or more expensive to mine, increasingly companies are thinking that we can't live in a world of unlimited resources forever. So it makes sense to try to recycle some of the resources or reuse them or repurpose them. Supply chains are usually global. You take any product you use in your life and you start doing research on, where does all the parts and all the material for that product comes from. The plastic may have come from one place in the world. The electronic components may have come from another place in the world. It may have been assembled in a third place in the world. And so supply chains are generally global. If you look at this jacket, this is an example. So the cotton and the liner was made in China. Thailand made the fur lining. Japan produced the zippers. Germany made the snap-on buttons. And Taiwan made the outdoor shell. And then it was assembled in some country, maybe Hong Kong or so forth, right? Some other place, Hong Kong, for example, or Thailand or something like that, it was assembled. And then it may have been sold in Germany, UK, Spain, US, Asia, anywhere else, right? So why is that the case? Why don't we have all of these companies in one place? That has to do with multiple factors. So you can't have every resource in every place. So where there's a good place to grow cotton, like Egypt grows cotton, other countries grow cotton, those countries may not have fur or the facilities to make artificial fur. The countries which make zippers, for example, they may not have the materials to make the outer shell. Also, countries and local economies specialize. So one country may specialize on stitching together fabric to make textile products. Another country may specialize in producing mechanical things like zippers, snap-on buttons. Another country may have specialized in producing cotton-related fabric, right? And so as these countries specialize, you may find the best source of supply in country A for item A and country B for item B. You may not find all the items in one country to source from. And obviously you want to make a competitive product, so you may often have to source from multiple places. Anybody who's ever worked in procurement would understand how to find the best suppliers. You often can't find all the best suppliers in one city or one state or just one country. You often have to look globally. So now that we understand supply chains and we understand that they're often global, what is supply chain management? Okay. One popular definition that is in that comes from a textbook on supply chain management, defines it as a set of approaches utilized to integrate suppliers, manufacturers, logistics infrastructure like warehouses, retail stores, so that merchandise is produced and distributed in the right quantities to the right locations at the right time in order to minimize system-wide costs while satisfying service level requirements. Yeah, so that's a mouthful, but if you look at the component parts, we're trying to be efficient. We're trying to reduce system-wide costs. That is a very important concept. What is system-wide cost? We'll discuss it in a little bit more in the coming slides, but the main idea is that you don't want to do local optimization. There are many ways a retailer can minimize its cost that simply shift the cost to the distributor or the manufacturer. So why is that not good? Well, that may serve the retailer temporarily, but then in next year or in future, the manufacturer or the distributor will increase their prices because their costs went up. So in the long term, you cannot just local optimize and keep your costs low. You have to optimize the entire system, right? And satisfying service level requirements, meaning meeting customer expectations. What is the objective of the supply chain? The objective is to maximize the value generated, which is sometimes also called the supply chain surplus. So what is the supply chain surplus or the value generated, right? So that is the supply chain surplus or the value generated by a supply chain is simply the value of the product or service to the customer minus the total costs to produce that product or service. So customer value is how much does the customer value the product or the service. This is reflected in the price the customer is willing to pay for the product. Supply chain cost is you go through the supply chain, add up all the costs. So the cost of the raw materials company to extract the materials, purify them, filter them, so forth. The cost of the component manufacturer to make components, the transportation cost between the links, between the stages, the cost of the manufacturer to build the part. So you keep adding those costs up as you go through. Imagine just walking all the way to the beginning of the supply chain, walking along with the product and materials that flow through, adding up the costs on your calculator till the item is in the hands of the end customer, and the total cost is the supply chain cost. Do not be fooled by transfer pricing. So if the component manufacturer sells the component for a certain price to the OEM manufacturer, that pricing captures the profit of the component manufacturer as well. So don't worry about the transfer pricing. Just add up the cost of everybody in the supply chain without worrying about the transfer pricing between stages, because we don't want to capture the profit here. We just want to capture the cost only, right? So we capture the total cost, and the value the customer is willing to pay minus the total supply chain cost is the supply chain surplus. Supply chain profit is the price or the revenue the customer actually pays minus the supply chain cost. So an example will illustrate the difference between the value for the customer and revenue from the customer. Usually, as a customer, you're not willing to pay more than what you value something for. So if you value something is worth $10, you're usually not going to pay $20 for it, right? So, but you may pay less. You may value something for $10, but it's available to you for $6. So you go and buy it for $6. You would have paid $10 for it, but the price is $6, so you pay less. So the customer value is usually bigger than or equal to the price the customer kind of pays. Okay. So let's look at an example. So let's say a customer is willing to spend $80 for a router. They go to Best Buy and they end up paying $60 because the router is on sale, or it's just that's the price of the router, right? And the total supply chain cost for the router was $40. So supply chain profit is going to be $20. Okay. Supply chain surplus is going to be the 80 minus the 40, or $40. Okay. And so the supply chain profit, $20, that will be the profit that will be made by all the companies in the supply chain. So the profit made by the manufacturer, the profit made by the component supplier, the profit made by Best Buy. If you add up all of these profits, they cannot exceed 20, because 20 is the total profit available for this supply chain. Okay. And so when we talk about improving supply chains, we try to drive the total supply chain costs down to increase the total supply chain profit. And then the next stage is that, how do you negotiate the pricing between the stages, which determines how the $20 is split between Best Buy and manufacturer and component manufacturer and so forth. Supply chain design, planning, and operation decisions play a significant role in the success or failure of a firm. Apple's success is often attributed to their extremely effective and efficient supply chain. They're able to produce large quantities on short notice. They're able to ship their, have their product available all over the world before product launches. They're able to keep manufacturing costs low for very advanced electronic products, which require very precision manufacturing. Without, their supply chain management expertise, Apple would not be what it is today. So the same holds for many companies: Walmart, Sam's Club, Costco, Dell. All these companies who have been successful have had really great supply chain management. Yeah. Can you name some companies that are known for being successful at, or excellent, or world-class at supply chain management? If you don't know, you can Google and you'll find some interesting stories, success stories about supply chain management. This is Gartner's top 25 list. These are companies they've ranked who have really good supply chains. Usually, in general, it's not appropriate to compare companies in different industries, because the supply chain, as you will learn in this course, how you run the supply chain depends on the demand and product and customer characteristics. So the way you run a supply chain for diapers is not the same way you would run a supply chain for iPads, for example, right? And so it's not an apples to apples comparison to compare Apple with Nestle or with Procter and Gamble, for example, right? So also it's not an apples to apples comparison to compare Amazon with Apple, for example, things like that, right? However, it's important to understand how they are making this ranking, because there's some valuable insights there. So 50% of the weight or the score goes to peer opinion. I don't know how accurate this is, but it's basically the reputation of the company in the industry. 20% goes to return on physical assets. Physical assets are property, plant, equipment, and inventories. So for $1 you invest in physical assets, how many dollars of profit does that supply chain generate? Obviously, efficient supply chains will generate more profit per dollar invested in the supply chain, right? So it's a return on investment from investments in supply chain for the company. Higher numbers mean more efficiency in the supply chain. 5% is inventory turns. That again measures efficiency in your planning. If you have really good planning, you can meet your demand by having very high inventory turnover. If you don't have good planning, you're going to have a whole bunch of inventory sitting around that will have low turnovers, right? So that is also a useful metric. Revenue growth does not just depend on supply chain. It depends on multiple factors, including the product features, and so forth. So, but it's also impacted by supply chain, but it's not 100% controlled by supply chain. So this factor is kind of important, but maybe does not directly measure only supply chain performance. It measures performance of the overall company, product design team, their marketing, and so forth as well. Then they have 15% weight given to ESG component score, which is how good the company is in environment issues, sustainability issues, social issues, governance issues. So things like, do they have conflict of interest policy? Do they have a policy to treat their suppliers in a good manner and not to exploit them? Do they treat the communities they work in properly, or do they just pollute everything, right? So those sorts of things go here. And then they make a composite score by a weighted average. So I would say, in my opinion, you shouldn't try to compare companies across different industries, but within an industry, you can definitely use some of these factors to compare them. I think ROPA, return on physical assets, is a good measure. Inventory turns is a good measure. Revenue growth is an okay measure, especially within the same industry. Revenue growth becomes more like for like, so maybe it's more appropriate within the same industry. But again, the product characteristics impact this a lot too. And then ESG score, I think, is a good factor as well, because there's research that shows that customers like companies which have a strong ESG performance. They don't like companies which pollute and make the environment bad, or put pollutants in the soil and stuff like that, right? And so these four are kind of okay to good measures to compare companies in the same industry. You can see that the list does change. So this is 2017, this is 2021, and it's interesting to see which companies moved up, which companies moved down in their list. So why is supply chain management a big deal? You'll notice there's a lot of interest in supply chain management, especially COVID has shown how supply chain problems can impact whole countries, regions, and economies. So it is a big deal because it is not easy. There's a lot of variables, a lot of things that can go wrong, and anything that goes wrong can affect the life and the life of customers and consumers very significantly, right? Imagine not having baby formula available for sale in a region, right? What are you going to do for small children, especially those who are in daycare and so forth, right? So it can have catastrophic consequences. Obviously, there's been COVID and a lot of issues recently, and these are some issues from the past. Just to give you an idea, that supply chain issues are not once in a lifetime type of thing, because supply chains are global. Every year or other year, something is happening somewhere around the world, and so you kind of have to think of disruptions in supply chain as part of everyday work in a supply chain manager's job, and you have to be prepared for them and how to manage them, right? So risk management is a very important part of supply chain management as well. There's also complexity, not just is there risk management and unexpected events. There is also a lot of complexity. So National Semiconductor, which was acquired by Texas Instruments, used to have 6 different production locations, 4 in the US and then 2 others in the rest of the world. Then the output of those 6 factories was shipped to 7 assembly locations in Southeast Asia, and then the final product was shipped to hundreds of facilities across the world. So if you draw the supply chain web, it's a very complicated web with 6 in one stage, then 7, and then hundreds in the end stage, right? There's 20,000 different routes that product could take in this web. 12 different airlines were involved, and 95% of products were delivered within a 45-day lead time. So you had to meet lead time deadlines. 5% were delivered within 90 days. So the sheer complexity of managing this network is also what makes supply chain management difficult. Then the third thing that makes supply chain management difficult is conflicting objectives. Everybody in the supply chain, if they only look after their short-term interest, that can lead to a lot of conflicts. Okay, for example, the customer wants convenience and short lead times and large variety of products. However, for the retailer, it's very expensive to carry a large variety. Ideally, the retailer would carry a small variety of products which are very popular and will sell very well. So there's a conflict there. What the customer wants is not what the retailer finds most profitable. Then between the retailer and distributors, retailer would want a distribution center close by, so the retailer does not have to carry a lot of inventory. They can just reorder quickly from the distributor. The distribution operation may be more efficient with having fewer distribution centers, because the cost of running a large distribution center, you can have a very efficient large distribution center where the per unit cost is low versus less efficient many small distribution centers. Also has to do with inventory concentration, and so forth. And we'll study all of that in this course. Why? So if you don't understand why there's conflict in the red arrows, don't worry, you'll know it by the end of the course. But it's just to point out that there is conflict, right? The distributor wants to send full truckload shipments to the retailer. Retailer might want smaller shipments every day of the week because that makes them keep less inventory, for example. Manufacturer might want to do large production batches to reduce their fixed cost expense or setup cost expense, whereas the distributor might want frequent small batches because they want to carry a lot of inventory because inventory is cost, right? So you can see that now what is good in the short term for a particular company may not be what's optimal for the supply chain. So how do you get everybody on board, try to optimize the entire supply chain and try to distribute the rewards of that in a fair manner so that everybody wants to stay on board and work with you. And so that is the challenge. The potential is great. 10 to 15% of GDP directly is involved in supply chain activities like transportation, storage of goods, and management of that. And some experts estimate that there's a lot of money still to be saved by improving supply chains. Okay? And so, for example, some years ago, it was estimated that in the grocery industry, by improving the supply chains, you could save $30 billion or 10% of the operating cost. A typical box of cereal, spends a lot of days getting from the factory to the supermarket. Obviously, it's not true for every single location. So if you have a factory in Ohio and there's a retail store in Ohio, that may be getting cereal box in 3 days from the factory or 2 days from the factory, right? But this is like the average, because you may have only a few factories and you may be shipping cereal boxes all over North America, for example. A typical car spends 15 days traveling from the factory to the dealership, right? And so there's a lot of room to cut down on lead times, cut down on costs, and improve supply chain. So there's a potential to improve profitability of companies. These are some examples of successful supply chains. You can look at National Semiconductor. We talked about them earlier. They started doing faster transportation using air transportation. And if you take the logistics course, you'll understand why air transportation may make sense for semiconductors. They take up a small space. They're dense products that are very high value. Their value per cubic feet is very high. Like iPhones, it may make sense to ship iPhones by air, but it may not make sense to ship ping pong balls by air. Okay, so why is that? You're studying logistics, maybe somewhat in this course as well. But anyway, they used air transportation, which makes sense for their product. Closed 6 warehouses. They had a 34% increase in sales because of faster response to retail or the selling company, and 47% decrease in delivery lead time. So, by optimizing the supply chain, you can get often dramatic increases in productivity. Okay. Laura Ashley was able to increase inventory turns from 2 a year to 10 times a year. That is a huge improvement. Reduce your inventory costs, reduce your working capital requirements, reduce your operational expenses, right? So some companies have really transformed themselves by focusing on supply chain management. Now, supply chain management is not just good for companies and supply chains, it is also very important for economies. Okay? A study by economists showed that improved supply chain management was able to reduce the duration of recessions, right? Because usually, the recessions used to be in the past longer lasting. So if you went into a recession, you stayed in a recession for a long time. But over time, and more recently, what economists are observing is when the economy does go in a recession, it's able to rebound rather quickly. And they were thinking, why is that? And what they realized was that supply chains are able to adjust very quickly. So if the demand falls, they're able to adjust their production quickly and not generate a lot of extra product, which ends up as inventory and as cost. And as demand starts to pick up, they're able to increase their production and meet demand very quickly. And so improved supply chain management is actually helped not having a whole bunch of inventory around when you're in a recession, and then being able to upscale quickly as demand comes back. And so that has helped reduce the duration of recession. So it has a positive impact on everybody's lives, on the whole economy. Decisions in a supply chain can be taken at multiple levels. So the first lecture we'll do after this intro lecture, we'll talk about strategic decisions. Strategic decisions are about supply chain strategy, about network design. These decisions have implications for multiple years. They can't easily be reversed. Then you have tactical decisions, which are about workforce, about production scheduling, about which factory ships material to which warehouse, right? These decisions, once you take them, you can change them next month or so forth, right? Your production schedules may only be fixed for the next 2 months, right? So you have a shortened time horizon, and you review them and change them often. And then there are operational decisions, which are day-to-day decisions. Okay, is my truck late today? Did the truck get loaded? Did the truck leave today, right? A lot of entry-level jobs are at the operational decisions level, where they're just responsible to make sure things are running smoothly day to day. But as you advance up the ladder in your career, as you get into managerial roles, you start taking tactical decisions, and as you go further higher up, you start taking strategic decisions. So in the course, we study all decisions at all 3 levels. But in your job, if you're in an entry-level job, you might only be doing operational decisions, and you might say, well, why am I studying this strategy? It's all this clouds in the air type of stuff. It will make a whole lot sense the higher up the ladder you go, because often entry-level positions don't get to make strategic decisions, but it's important to learn about them so you understand why your company is doing what it's doing, and then you're able to take those decisions as you rise up the ranks. One important concept in supply chains is the push-pull boundary, and that is the idea that how the different companies in the supply chain interact, there's a point in the supply chain where that interaction changes fundamentally. Okay. When you go and buy something from a retail store like Walmart, Walmart does not you go to Walmart, you say, okay, I want a box of cereals. Walmart is not going to call up the cereal company and say, please produce a box of cereals, I have a customer waiting here, right? They already have a box of cereals ready for you, available on the shelf to pick up and buy and go and consume. And so that is called push, because Walmart put that cereal box on the shelf anticipating demand. They did the action before the demand occurred. Before you walked into Walmart and asked for the box of cereals, Walmart had already taken action, procured that box of cereals, unpacked it from a big pallet, and put it nicely on the shelf for you to consume. So that's called push, where you produce and make something ready before customer walks in and demands it. If you go to a restaurant and you order a meal, the restaurant will often cook the meal after you order it. That's called pull, because some of the activities, at least the final cooking or the final steps, are done after the demand has been received. Okay, producing something custom manufacturing is often pull, because the manufacturing has to be based on customer requirements. So you go to a custom manufacturer and you say, I want a furniture piece like this with your special taste in mind, and then the furniture manufacturer produces that dining table set for you. That's pull, because they did some of the production after receiving your customer order, or after observing demand from you. Okay. So, in a supply chain, at some point, if it's a traditional retail environment, the retailer might be doing push, but at some point the supply chain may switch over to pull. So let's say Walmart does push. They order cereals box in advance of a customer walking into the store. They put them on the shelves in advance. But when Walmart orders the cereal box from Kellogg's company, or some company like that, that company may produce the cereal box after getting the Walmart order, because Walmart may place a huge order and then they will produce it after getting the Walmart order. That means that company like Kellogg's is working on pull, whereas Walmart is working on push. So that is the pull-push boundary in the supply chain. You move from pull-based activities and production at the Kellogg manufacturing facility to push-based operations at Walmart stores. Okay. So it's important to identify the push-pull boundary, because when you're doing pull-based activities, often lead times are longer. Right. So if you have everything ready in anticipation of demand, you go in, you get the thing right away. But if you're doing pull, then you have to produce or do something with the thing, right? So cars often used to be push. You would go to a dealership and you would just buy a car at the dealership. It was already ready there for you. But these days, because of the chip shortage, semiconductor shortage in the car industry, cars have become pull now. You go to a dealership and they have no new cars. They say, you give us a deposit, you order the car, and we'll get it to you in 3 months' time. Right. So that has, because of a shortage, they have gone from push to pull, for example. So there's a boundary in a supply chain. That boundary, the push-pull boundary, used to be at the car manufacturer. The car manufacturer would produce based on push, but the car manufacturer's supplier would produce based on pull. So the push-pull boundary was between the car manufacturer and their tier 1 suppliers. But now that push-pull boundary has kind of moved forward, and now manufacturers are just producing the orders that customers book, because there's so many of the customer booked orders, they don't have any extra capacity to produce for push. Right, so it's an important thing to notice when you study a supply chain, because you'll notice when you move from push to pull, lead times suddenly go up, because pull, when you're doing some activities after getting the customer order, it's going to take you some time to do those activities. Let's look at 2 supply chains to really understand this concept. Let's look at LL Bean catalog retailer. So LL Bean ships catalogs to customers. Customers look at the catalog and they call up the phone and say, I want this jacket, I want this shirt, I want this sweater, I want this, shorts. And so when the customer calls and places the order, the LL Bean's warehouse gets into action. They pick up that product, they pack it and ship it out. So the LL Bean warehouse is working on a pull process. However, the warehouse has already received that product from the suppliers in anticipation of customer demand. LL Bean Warehouse is not going to call up some supplier in Asia and order the shirt after you place the order on the phone with them, because then your order will take 5 months to arrive. They've already ordered the shirt from their supplier in I don't know, Egypt or Vietnam in advance, and already received the shirts, and the shirts are waiting in their warehouse. So that is the push-pull boundary. LL Bean is working on pull, okay, in their warehouse to serve you, but their warehouse then is working, warehouse and the supply chain upstream of the warehouse is working on push. Okay. Ethan Allen Customized Furniture. They make furniture after getting the customer order, because the customer can customize, the wood, the finish of the wood, other things about the furniture, the design, right? So the customer places the order, which is very customized. After they get the customer order, they're going to produce the furniture. So all of that is pull. However, after they get the customer order, they're not going to place an order for timber. They already have bought the wood or the raw materials. So they're acquiring the raw materials in anticipation of customer orders is push, but the manufacturing and manufacturing onwards, everything else happens on pull, right? And so we can see the push-pull boundary in various supply chains. Okay. It can be very useful to make strategic and planning decisions because moving the push-pull boundary can require significant investments and redesign of the supply chain. Also, understanding the push-pull boundary can give you a sense of where lead times can be a problem or issue, where there's going to be a bigger issue controlling lead times, and so forth. Right. Also, inventory, you'll have more finished goods inventory in push type of system. You'll have less finished goods inventory in a pull type of system. So the nature of the inventory can change. And so all these things are important when you're analyzing a supply chain to understand what is a push process here, what is a pull process here. Paint industry did this very successfully. They actually converted a push part of the supply chain to pull, and they had a lot of benefits. Okay, so early on in 1980s, paint was produced in specific colors. So you went to a paint shop and they had 50 different colors of paint already mixed for you from the factory, produced from the factory in those colors, and you so the colors, the coloring of the paint was a push process. It was already made in those colors in anticipation of customer demand. But then they discovered a way where color mixing could be done in the retail shop. So the color addition became a pull process, where once the customer said, I want this color, then they would mix the paint with that color for you. So by doing that, they could just mix a standard base to the retail stores, and the retail stores could now offer thousands of colors without having to carry a lot of inventory. Imagine if a retail store had to carry inventory of every single paint color out there. Right, you need to have a huge store, maybe bigger than an IKEA store, just to carry all that paint. It'll be very costly to store all that inventory. So by moving a push process, the color mixing, to a pull process, by investing in technology, automation, doing that mixing in the retail store, a lot of costs were saved, especially inventory costs. And you were able to offer a wider range of colors at lower cost. So huge success story in the paint industry. Try to think about these supply chains: soda vending machine, Amazon.com, emergency care at hospitals, McDonald's, high-end steak restaurants, and try to identify the push-pull boundary for them. Okay. So you can pause the video, think about them. You can discuss with friends or peers in the class. Let's just talk about McDonald's. McDonald's, when you go to buy a burger from McDonald's, they assemble the burger after you place the order. So assembly of the burger is pull, but a lot of the other parts are push, because the meat patty might have been already cooked and ready. The salad has already been cut up, right? Everything else is just ready. Just the final assembly of the burger happens in pull. Everything else is for example, push in McDonald's. So you can analyze that. And why do they have the assembly left as pull? Because they can offer larger variety. Do you want burger with lettuce or without lettuce? Do you want one chicken patty or a beef patty or two beef patties, right? So you can customize a little bit. So the pull part of the McDonald's supply chain allows a little bit of customization to the customer, because if they had the whole burger ready to go already, then you wouldn't be able to customize it. So because customers value customization, they're doing one final step as pull, but everything else is happening as push. Why is everything else happening as push? To keep the lead time low. If they started cooking your meat patty after you place the order at McDonald's, they may take 20 minutes to serve one customer, and they want to be really fast. Customers go in and out, so they want to keep the lead time low. So that's why the rest of the part is push. This is a final example before we end this lecture. It's the value of collaboration in a supply chain. So this is a simple numerical example where we have a payoff table. That's this table in the middle, okay? And a retailer has to decide how much product to order, and the demand they face is given in the yellow table on your left. So probability of 20% demand will be 1,000, probability of 20% or 0.2 demand will be 800, and so on. So it's like a uniform demand. It could be 1,000, 800, 600, 400, 200, equal chance to be any of these levels of demand. Maybe this is weekly demand, right? And the retailer has to decide every Sunday how much they want to stock for that week, or every Saturday or something like that, right? And so the retailer could stock 1,000, 800, 600, 400, or 200. The retailer makes $5 per piece because they sell it for $10 and they pay $5 to their supplier, the distributor, right? And so you can make this payoff table where you can calculate the profit of the retailer under each scenario. So if the retailer orders 1,000 and demand is 1,000, they make 5,000 in profit. But if they order 1,000 and demand is only 800, then they lose money on the 200 which is not sold, okay, because the things expire or you have inventory costs to hold them, so they lose money. Okay, especially if this is a short life cycle type of product, like a grocery supply chain, right? Fruit is going to go bad or something is going to go bad, right? And so you can see that if the demand is very low, 200, ordering 1,000, they actually end up making a loss because they have to write off so much product. Okay, if they order very little, it's risk-free. They always make money, but they always make little money. So look at that column for 200, right? They're always making money, but making little money. So retailer will do this payoff table analysis and pick a quantity which maximizes the profit. We can calculate the expected profit by multiplying each profit figure by the probability of that profit, which comes from the probability of demand. And you can see that the optimal the maximum expected profit for the retailer is 600. So the optimal decision as a retailer is order 600 every week, and on the long run you'll make the most profit because you're averaging $800 per week, which is more than averaging on the other strategies. Okay, if the retailer orders 800, the distributor will make a profit of 2,400 because the retailer makes $4 per piece because they buy it from $1 for the manufacturer, right? The manufacturer might be a farmer in this case, distributor might be a wholesale provider of fruits and vegetables, retailer might be something like Kroger. Okay, and so the total supply chain profit will be the profit of the retailer plus the profit of the distributor plus the profit of the manufacturer. But to keep the example simple, we're only discussing the retailer, distributor, and customer part of the supply chain. Okay, and so for this part of the supply chain, the total supply chain profit is $4,200. Now let's assume the retailer and distributor decided to work together and collaborate, and they said, forget the transfer pricing of $5. Let's work together to make the most money we can, and then we'll split the pie. Okay, we'll split that money between each other. Okay, how that happens, we'll talk about that later in the course, on what are the mechanisms to make this collaboration happen, how you can work together and then split the pie. But for now, for simplicity, just assume they're going to work together as if they were one company. They're going to forget about the transfer pricing of $5 between them. For distributor and retailer together as one unit, their cost is $1 and they sell for $10. And between them, however they do the distribution of money, we can talk about that later. When that happens, now if you do the payoff table analysis, the retailer, when they sell something, they make $9 because retailer and distributor together, when they sell any unit, they make $9 per piece. So this is the total profit they make. And if you look at the expected profits, the maximum expected profit now is $5,000 for both of them combined together. Right? So if you compare this 5,000 to the previous slide, they have increased their profit by $800. In the previous example, where they were working independently, their total profit was $4,200. But by working together, they can actually make $500 of profit and sell more stuff and keep more stuff in stock. basically they're taking a little bit higher risk, and then they can distribute the 5,000 equally. Even if they distribute equally, they're both better off, because remember, before one guy was making 1,800, the other was making 2,400. If you split 5,000 equally, they both make 2,500, so both of them are better off with collaboration than without collaboration. This is a simple example to show some of the possible benefits of collaboration. This is not the only benefits. We'll learn about the bullwhip effect. We should require some collaboration to manage, and there are many other issues where the benefits of collaboration come into play. But this is an example of what's sometimes called double marginalization, where if the retailer if the supplier is making a decent amount of money and the retailer is making a decent amount of money, and they only think about themselves, they will reach a suboptimal decision. This is like a local optima, not the optimal for the whole supply chain. But if they work together, they can make, both of them can make more money. Okay, so that's it for this lecture. Hopefully this gives you a brief introduction to what are supply chains, what is supply chain management, gave you an example, some important concepts like the push-pull boundary, and it gave you an example to show how working together across company boundaries with other players in the supply chain can make more profit for everybody rather than just working alone.